What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the bait making channel. Now, if you're watching this video, you likely saw the title and want to know how to improve your jigs for the 2022 season and beyond. And what I'm going to show you today is going to make your jigs last longer, give you customization, whether it's in skirt materials or it's in the way that your jig looks, and really give you more efficiency on the water. You probably also fish a jig a lot, and for most of you guys that do fish a jig, most of the jigs you're fishing have a rubber banded skirt like I'm showing you right here. That's the easiest way for companies to make a jig is with a banded skirt. But the problem with this is you can't really customize colors. It doesn't last forever. These rubber bands will dry out, crack, fall off, and fall apart. Or they'll just simply fall down your jig and you won't be very efficient because you'll be fiddling with the skirt all day long. So what I want to show you guys today is how to wire tie your skirt. It's going to give you a lot of advantages. Like I mentioned, it'll make your jig last a lot longer. That rubber band won't wear out because you'll have that wire on there, which will last forever. Your jig skirt is fixed in place. It won't fall down whether you're skipping a jig, whether you're flipping it in heavy grass, or you're fishing it around heavy cover. That jig skirt won't fall down. And finally, you can really customize the colors and where they're at in the jig. If you look at this bluegill swim jig that I'm showing you right here, you have your orange on the bottom, your green pumpkin blue in the middle, and then your Junebug on the top. You can really customize the way that bait looks, and as opposed to these rubber skirted skirts right here, these are going to kind of be just a humble jumble hodgepodge of colors. You can customize where those colors go, be really effective at matching the hatch, and give you a little bit of an advantage on the water. Now this is actually how I got into bait making. This is how I got into bait fiddling. Was I got into jig fishing. I loved to do it, but I couldn't find a jig skirt that I really loved, and more than that, I couldn't find a jig skirt that would stay on the jig longer than a day. And so by wire tying jigs, it just gave me that ability to kind of come home, have something to do during the winter, but also make some really premium jigs for myself. What we're going to be showing you guys today is the Sparkie head from Do It Molds. It's a 1/2 ounce compact style jig with living rubber and orange Flashabou. It's a pretty compact jig with a moderate skirt density, but it's a great jig. It's not super complicated. It doesn't look like anything crazy, but it just straight out catches fish. It's green pumpkin, flat living rubber, a little bit of orange Flashabou, and it's a really simple jig to tie. Then I'm also going to show you guys how to tie just your standard silicone skirts for your swim jigs, or whether you want to do that on your casting jigs as well. You can get really precise with this. You can layer colors, you can use specific amounts of strands. In this particular jig, it's a total of 2 tabs of jig skirt, which is basically the overall normal density that I like my jig skirts to be. But what's nice about this is I can use a 1/2 tab of orange, a 1/2 tab of purple, and a full tab of that green pumpkin blue and layer it to make it look like a bluegill. So this is going to give me a unique advantage on the water to have a custom bait, custom swim jig that I can fish around those bluegill when they're up there spawning, up there in shallow cover, and get a lot of big bites. So I'm going to show you guys that in today's video. Without further ado, I'm going to take you guys over to my tying table, show you guys how to tie these up. Let's start with the basic components you're going to need for wire tying. First thing is a ruler. You're going to need this for cutting your Flashabou or your living rubber to length. I use 5-inch pieces. You're obviously going to need a pair of scissors. That's going to cut the living rubber. It's also going to cut your skirt tabs, so a nice pair of scissors. Then 26 gauge black coated wire. They make a bunch of different wire out there. I like the black coated, especially when I'm tying like green pumpkin jigs or anything of a darker color. They also have a bronze color, which is really nice if you're tying like crawfish style brown jigs. That adds a nice touch, and you don't necessarily need the black wire. Then you need a small pair of channel locks or needle nose pliers, and then some wire snips to cut this when you're done. What you're going to do is you're going to take that living rubber and you're essentially going to wrap the wire and lay the living rubber on the top of your jig. One thing you want to do is favor the top side of the jig. You want to add a little bit longer section to the top side of the jig because that's going to have to fold over, and then you can trim it up to even it out. But all I'm going to do is lay that living rubber and the Flashabou onto the jig, and then I'm going to make an easy wrap with my wire tie. So I'm going to go around once, and I'm going to pull that wire pretty tight. You want to make sure it's up against the head of that jig and pull it tight. And now you can really start to shape the way that you want that living rubber setting up on your jig. That's one of the best parts about wire, is it's going to keep pretty much everything on the jig where you put it. There's a little bit of movement. You can move things around a little bit afterwards, but it's a lot tighter. It's a lot more precise than if you were just to use one of those rubber bands that I showed you guys. So once you have everything placed, what you're going to do is you're going to pull that wire tight. And now I just did a single wrap. You basically have two pieces of wire crossing each other, and I'm just going to cross it tight. That's going to basically lock everything in. So everything is pretty much locked in now. The living rubber and the flash is wrapped around that jig head, and I'm going to wrap it around 8 times. Once it's wrapped around 8 times, you have a pretty good tie. Like, that's not going to move very much. But I'm going to take those channel locks or the pliers, and I'm going to twist it around just a few more times just to make sure it's nice and snug. You don't want to go too many times. You don't want to snap that off, and you also don't want to cut your rubber or your skirting material. Then I'm just going to trim those two ends of the wire just like that. So once you have that trimmed, I'm going to take and I'm going to press down that little end of the wire against the back of the jig head, and pretty much from here you're almost done. All you're going to do now is trim your living rubber. You're going to basically separate these strands, and the way that you do that is you pull the end, and when you cut it, you'll see it start to come apart. Now, living rubber is a little bit less forgiving than other materials, so you might have to go back and spread it out a little bit more. You might have to separate some of the strands, but for the most part you're going to get it pretty much separated just by pulling it tight and cutting it like so. Now we're going to type that swim jig, and this is going to be the silicone jig. So we're going to be using those silicone tabs, which are pretty standard on most of your jig skirts, like this right here. This is your standard jig skirt that you can buy from like Boss Tackle or Bass Pro Shops. There's a bunch of places you can buy these out there, but they come rubber banded, and you basically slide it on over the jig, and you're pretty much good to go. It's a quick change skirt, but the problem with those rubber band jigs is that you can't get super specific. One of the benefits of wire tying is that you can get really specific. You can have certain colors on one section of the jig and really dial it in, and so that's what I'm going to show you here. What we're going to start with is this half a tab of green pumpkin, and for this jig we're going to use a total of 1 tab, and so we're going to use half a tab of the Junebug, and I'm just going to layer it on the top of the jig. That's going to be the back color on the jig. Now my green pumpkin blue flake is going to be the middle color, the orange is going to be the bottom color to sort of give me a bluegill look. So I'm going to layer this now on the top or the bottom of the jig, depending on how you want to consider that. So once you layer that on the jig, all you want to do is sort of wrap your wire semi-tight. Now once it's semi-tight, you can really start to position the skirt the way that you want it. Again, you want to favor the top of the jig so there's more skirt coming off the top side away from you and less coming off the bottom, and then you can adjust it when you trim. But that's going to allow you to layer your colors in the way that you want. So as you can see, the purple's on the top of the jig, your green pumpkin blues, basically your base color all around the jig, and then your orange with that little bit of black is going to be the bottom color. So once you get it set like that, you give it a couple twists. I use 8. And then I'm going to take those channel locks or pliers, give it a couple more turns. And you don't want to break it off, so just 2 or 3. And then snip like so. Then all you're going to do is take those pliers and push that down. You just trim your tag ends on these tabs. And this is way easier than living rubber because this is coming apart super easy. So once you trim your tab ends, you're more or less done making this jig. I want to now show you guys how I tie these jigs from the opposite vantage, give you guys a little different perspective. And the first one we're going to be tying is that living rubber. So you're going to basically take your 1.5 tabs and wrap it around the jig, favoring the top side of the jig. Again, as I mentioned a couple times, you're going to want more material at the top side of the jig, so when you trim it, it'll end up pretty even. And essentially I'm going to get one really good wrap and then start to sort of position the living rubber and the flash how I want it. Most of the flash I like to keep down towards the bottom side of the jig. I want to keep it on the back side up towards me. I don't know why this is. This is just something I have confidence in, and then I'm going to give it 8 wraps. I lost count, so I might have gave it a couple extra, but a couple extra never hurt. Take my pliers and just tighten it down a few more times. That's going to make a really, really tight lock on that skirt material. And then I just snip it off. It's super, super simple. It's pretty quick, and once you start getting the hang of it, I think this is something that you guys can do to most of your jigs to give you a little bit better performance and shelf life out of your jigs. Now I'm going to take and cut that living rubber material, and when you cut it, for the most part it spreads out. If you take your time, you're still going to have chunks, obviously, small clumps. That's just going to happen with living rubber, especially the flat living rubber like I use. But you can separate that by hand pretty easily. So overall, your jig's pretty much done. Now I'm going to basically trim it up to the bottom of the jig hook, and that's going to give me that compact profile that I'm looking for. I don't like to leave any long pieces, and that's going to be the finished product right there. Next we're going to tie that weedless casting jig, that swim jig from Do It Molds. I don't have a weed guard in this one yet, just because it was too cold in the garage to put it on earlier today. But this is going to be that same color pattern. I'm going to take that half a tab of Junebug, put it on the top side of the jig, then my green pumpkin blue flake, and then my orange, just like that. Now what I'm going to do is take my wire and basically lock all those colors in, and then I can start to adjust the color position. It's going to let me really sort of work with how I want that skirt laid out and that skirt material laid out around the jig. Once I get all those colors pretty much situated how I want them, 8 more wraps. More or less with the silicone jig, you're pretty much done, with the exception of trimming that jig and taking those tabs off. But silicone's really fast. This is a great way that you can customize your jigs, make them look like exactly what you want them to look like, and make your skirts last and your jigs last a lot longer. Here's just a final close-up look at those 2 jigs we tied. This is the living rubber Sparkie head 1/2 ounce compact jig with the orange Flashabou. It's a pretty basic color, but it catches a lot of fish. That living rubber has a really unique action, and obviously there's some more strands I have to separate once I get off the video, but it turned out really nice. This is a great all-around jig. It's going to last you a long time and catch you a lot of fish. And then for that silicone skirted swim jig, you basically have your bluegill color here with the Junebug back, the green pumpkin blue in the center, and that half a tab of orange on the bottom. So that's what I like to do anytime that I'm fishing a jig. Once I find a jig color I like, I'll tie up some jig skirts. You can actually do this with these banded skirts. If you want to do this, you can buy these banded skirts and simply tie it and then snip this band. It's going to make your jigs last a lot longer, and there's a lot of benefits to having a wire-tied skirt as opposed to those banded skirts. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, wire tying jigs. This is something that's super simple, super easy, that you can do all winter long. That'll give you a lot more efficiency on the water. It's a great way to get into bait making as well. There's not a huge investment, because if you want to go out, you can just buy the jig heads, buy the skirt material, and do it at your house. And it's super simple, and it's a great way to pass some time. But you can also get really in depth with this. There's a lot of added benefits to tying your own jig skirts, and hopefully I exposed some of those for you guys in today's video. Whether it's changing up the jig skirt material you use, really positioning the colors in the way that you'd like them to be, or just making your jigs last a lot longer, there are a lot of added benefits to tying your own jig skirts and basically making your own jigs. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you guys want to check out any of the materials that I used in today's video, the Sparkie jig mold, the Weedless casting jig mold from Do It, or any of the skirt tying materials, it's going to be linked down in the description below. If you guys have any questions or comments, hit me up down in the comment section. If you're not already subscribed, hit that little red button, hit the notification bell. It'll let you know when I post more videos just like this one. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.